What would you sacrifice for a child who isn't yours? Would you share your last meal when your own son is hungry at home? Would you risk everything, your job, your reputation, maybe even your freedom, for a kid everyone else has given up on? If stories like this move you, if you believe kindness still matters in this world, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Because what you're about to hear isn't just another heartwarming tale. This is about a teacher who lost everything for doing the right thing, and how the universe paid her back in the most unexpected way imaginable. Sarah Mitchell was 34 years old when her life fell apart for the second time. The first time had been the divorce. Standard story: husband cheated, took most of their savings in the settlement, left her with her 8-year-old son Jake and enough debt to make breathing feel expensive. She'd rebuilt, though. Found a teaching job at Riverside Elementary that paid just enough to keep them in their small apartment, kept food on the table most days, kept Jake in his soccer league because that kid deserved at least one thing that felt normal after watching his parents' marriage implode. The second collapse started with a sandwich. It was a Tuesday in October when Sarah first noticed the boy. Not hard to miss him, honestly. He was maybe 8 years old, sitting on the concrete steps outside the corner store 3 blocks from school. His clothes were too big, hanging off his thin frame like they belonged to someone else first. Probably had. His sneakers had holes in them, the kind that let rain seep through and turn your socks into cold, wet misery. But it was his eyes that stopped Sarah mid-stride on her way to school. Those eyes were too old, too aware. The kind of awareness that came from seeing things no 8-year-old should see, from learning that the world could be cruel and indifferent and that nobody was coming to save you. He was staring at her lunch bag. Sarah had packed 2 sandwiches that morning. One for herself, one for Jake's after-school program. She did the math in her head, the quick, guilty calculation of someone who'd learned to count pennies. She could skip lunch. Her prep period was 4th block anyway, and she could use that time to catch up on grading instead of eating. She walked over and held out the sandwich. The boy looked at her with such raw suspicion that it almost made her laugh. Almost. Because that suspicion was earned, wasn't it? When had anyone given this kid something without wanting something back? "I'm not hungry," Sarah lied. "You'd be doing me a favor." The boy took the sandwich. Didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. The way he tore into it, barely chewing, trying to eat and watch her simultaneously in case this was some kind of trick, that told her everything she needed to know about his life. "I'm Sarah," she said. "What's your name?" The boy swallowed hard, looked at her like he was deciding whether names were information you gave to strangers. Finally, quietly, "Marcus." That became their routine. Every morning, Sarah packed an extra sandwich. Every morning, Marcus was sitting on those same steps. Rain or shine, hot or cold, that kid was there. And every morning, Sarah gave him half her lunch, pretended she wasn't hungry, ignored the way her stomach cramped by mid-afternoon. Jake noticed, of course. Kids always notice when there's less food than usual. But Jake was a good kid. He understood, even when Sarah saw him eyeing the pantry and doing his own calculations about whether they could afford the name-brand cereal this week. It took 3 weeks before someone reported her. Principal Denise Crawford called Sarah into her office on a Wednesday morning, her expression that particular mixture of disappointment and condescension that made Sarah feel like she was the student instead of a teacher with 6 years' experience. "We've had complaints," Denise said, not bothering with pleasantries. "About you fraternizing with that homeless boy." Fraternizing? Like sharing food with a hungry child was some kind of scandal. "I'm giving him a sandwich," Sarah said carefully. "On my own time. Before school starts." "You're creating an association between our school and vagrants," Denise replied, her voice dropping to that tone people used when they wanted to sound reasonable while saying something deeply unreasonable. "Parents pay good money to send their children here. They don't want to see street kids hanging around the neighborhood. It reflects poorly on the institution. Street kids, like Marcus, was a problem to be managed rather than a child who needed help." "He's 8 years old," Sarah said, feeling her jaw clench. "He's hungry. That's not your responsibility. There are programs for that sort of thing. Shelters. Government assistance. You're a teacher, Sarah, not a social worker. Your job is to focus on the students whose parents can actually pay for their education." The words hung in the air between them, ugly and precise. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd known Denise was difficult, had seen her turn away parents who couldn't afford the voluntary school fees, had watched her allocate resources to families who could make generous donations while cutting programs for kids who needed them most. But hearing it said so plainly, so callously, that was different. "I'm going to keep feeding him," Sarah said quietly. Denise's expression hardened. "Then I can't guarantee your position here will remain secure. We have standards to maintain." Sarah walked out of that office knowing she just made her life significantly harder. But what was the alternative? Stop feeding a hungry kid because it made wealthy parents uncomfortable? That afternoon, when she split her sandwich with Marcus, she asked him something she'd been wondering about for weeks. "Do you have family? Anyone looking for you?" Marcus stopped chewing. His whole body went still in that way that meant she'd touched on something painful and complicated. "My parents died," he said finally. "Car accident when I was 4. I went into foster care. And nobody adopted you." Something dark flickered across Marcus's face. "People tried. It didn't work out." The way he said it made Sarah's stomach turn. She'd read enough about the foster care system to know what didn't work out sometimes meant. She'd seen the statistics about abuse, about kids who got shuffled from home to home until they aged out of the system or ran away, whichever came first. "I have a grandmother," Marcus continued, his voice so quiet Sarah had to lean in to hear. "Her name is Helena Castellano. She's rich, really rich, but she doesn't want me." Sarah felt like she'd been punched. "What do you mean she doesn't want you?" "After my parents died, someone told her about me. She said she couldn't take care of a kid. Said she was too old, too busy. She signed papers saying she didn't want custody." Marcus looked up at Sarah with those too old eyes. "So I ended up in the system. And nobody really wants the kids in the system." The name Helena Castellano rang a bell. Sarah pulled out her phone later that night after Jake had gone to bed, started searching. What she found made her hands shake. Helena Castellano was more than rich. She was a billionaire. Owner of Castellano Industries, a manufacturing empire that stretched across 3 continents. Forbes estimated her net worth at somewhere north of $4 billion. There were photos of her at charity galas, cutting ribbons at hospital wings that bore her name, accepting awards for philanthropy. And this woman had a grandson living on the street. Sarah dug deeper, searching for information about Marcus's parents. She found the obituaries from 5 years ago. Thomas and Jennifer Castellano, killed in a head-on collision on Highway 101. Survived by their son, Marcus, age 4. Services were held at St. Augustine's Cathedral. In lieu of flowers, donations could be made to the Children's Hospital Foundation. There were photos from the funeral. Helena Castellano, dressed in black, looking appropriately somber. But no mention of what happened to Marcus after that. No follow-up articles about the orphan boy. It was like he'd simply ceased to exist in any public record. Sarah tried calling the number listed for Castellano Industries the next morning. She got as far as the executive assistant, who informed her in tones of polite disdain that Ms. Castellano didn't take unsolicited calls and that any business inquiries should be submitted in writing through the proper channels. "This isn't about business," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is about her grandson." There was a pause. Then, "Ms. Castellano has no living relatives. Have a pleasant day." The line went dead. Sarah stood there holding her phone, feeling a cold fury building in her chest. Helena Castellano had wiped Marcus from existence so completely that even her own staff didn't know he was alive. That evening, Sarah made a decision that everyone in her life would later tell her was insane. She typed up everything she knew about Marcus, his age, his parents' names, the date of their death, the foster homes he'd been in. She included photos she'd taken of him with his permission, included the GPS coordinates of where he spent most nights sleeping in a covered bus stop shelter. And she mailed it to Helena Castellano with a letter that said simply, "Your grandson is alive. He's homeless. He's 8 years old. He believes you don't want him. If you have any humanity left, prove him wrong." She mailed it on a Friday. By Monday morning, her life had exploded. The knock on her classroom door came during second period. 2 police officers, looking apologetic but determined. Behind them, a woman in a severe gray suit who introduced herself as Margaret Chin from Child Protective Services. "We need to talk about Marcus Castellano," Margaret said. Sarah's students watched with wide eyes as she was escorted out of her classroom. In the hallway, Margaret's expression was cold and professional. You've been harboring a minor without legal guardianship. That's a serious offense, Ms. Mitchell. We've had reports that you've been seen with him regularly, providing him with food and supervision without reporting him to the proper authorities. I didn't know I needed to report giving a hungry child a sandwich, Sarah said, her voice sharper than intended. You've established an ongoing relationship with an unaccompanied minor. You failed to report a child in obvious distress to CPS. You've potentially interfered with active foster care proceedings. Margaret pulled out a folder. According to our records, Marcus ran away from his most recent placement 6 weeks ago. We've been searching for him. And all this time, you've been in contact with him without informing anyone. Sarah felt the ground shifting under her feet. I didn't know he was a runaway. He never told me. Ignorance isn't a legal defense. We're going to need you to tell us where Marcus is staying. And you're going to need to cooperate fully with our investigation, or we'll have no choice but to press charges. By the time Sarah left the police station that afternoon, after 4 hours of questioning, after surrendering her phone for examination, after signing statements and promising to appear for follow-up interviews, she'd lost her job. Principal Crawford had called personally to inform her that her contract was being terminated immediately, effective today. Something about conduct unbecoming of a faculty member and liability concerns. Sarah walked home in a daze. Her phone was blowing up with messages. The school parents' Facebook group was on fire with speculation and judgment. Someone had posted a photo of her with Marcus, captioned, "Local teacher under investigation for inappropriate contact with homeless child." Inappropriate contact. As if kindness was suspicious. As if feeding a hungry kid made her some kind of predator. Her ex-husband called that evening. Not to offer support. Not to ask if she was okay. No, David called to inform her that he was filing for emergency custody of Jake because clearly she couldn't be trusted to make sound decisions. "You're under investigation," David said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I can't let my son live with someone who's potentially dangerous. I gave a kid a sandwich, David. You got arrested. I was questioned. There's a difference. Not to a judge, there isn't. My lawyer says this is a slam dunk. You've demonstrated poor judgment. You've endangered your employment stability. You can't provide for Jake financially anymore. Face it, Sarah. You screwed up, and now Jake's going to pay the price unless I step in." The call ended with David promising to have his lawyer draft the emergency custody papers by end of week. Sarah sat on her couch that night, staring at the eviction notice that appeared on her door. 3 months behind on rent. She'd been using what little extra money she had to buy food for Marcus, telling herself she'd catch up later. Now there wouldn't be a later. She'd lost her job. She was about to lose her son. She was about to lose her home. And for what? For feeding a kid who everyone else had decided wasn't worth caring about. There was a knock on her door. Sarah almost didn't answer, assuming it was another process server or another bill collector. But something made her look through the peephole. A woman stood there, late 60s, expensively dressed, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like money and power, the kind of authority that came from decades of people doing exactly what you told them to do. Sarah opened the door. "Ms. Mitchell," the woman said. "I'm Helena Castellano. I believe we need to talk about my grandson." Inside Sarah's small apartment, Helena Castellano looked profoundly out of place. Everything about her screamed wealth and privilege. The designer suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, the handbag that Sarah recognized from fashion magazines she couldn't afford to buy, the subtle jewelry that was understated because it didn't need to announce itself. Helena sat down carefully on Sarah's second-hand couch, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "I didn't know," Helena said without preamble. "About Marcus. Nobody told me he existed after Thomas and Jennifer died." Sarah felt her jaw clench. "Your staff said you have no living relatives." "My staff says what I told them to say 5 years ago when I was grieving and angry and making terrible decisions I can never take back." Helena's voice was steady, but Sarah saw her hands shaking slightly. "When Thomas and Jennifer died, I was devastated. Thomas was my only child. When the adoption agency contacted me about Marcus, I said I couldn't handle it. I was 62. I just lost my son. I was running a company, and I convinced myself that a child deserved better than an elderly grandmother who didn't know the first thing about raising kids." So you just walked away? I signed papers that I thought would ensure Marcus went to a good family. I made a generous donation to the agency. I asked them to find him the best home possible and to never contact me again because I couldn't bear to watch someone else raise my son's child. Helena looked directly at Sarah. What I didn't know was that the agency I trusted was corrupt. They took my money, falsified records, and put Marcus into the system as an abandoned child with no family. They pocketed the donation that was supposed to ensure his placement and shuffled him through foster homes until he ran away. Sarah felt something cold in her chest. You didn't know he was in foster care? I didn't know he was alive. When I received your letter, I thought it was a scam. You have no idea how many people have tried to extort money from me over the years with fake relatives and manufactured tragedies. But something in your letter made me investigate. Helena pulled out a folder. I had my legal team verify everything. Birth certificates, death certificates, foster care records. It's all real. Marcus is real. And he's been suffering for 5 years because I was too grief-stricken and stubborn to do my job as his grandmother. The two women sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Sarah spoke. Why are you here? Why not just go through CPS and take custody? Because Marcus won't come with me. My people found him yesterday. He ran. Said the only person he trusts is some teacher lady who shares sandwiches. Helena looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. You're that teacher lady. I am. Tell me why you did it. Why you risked everything for a child you barely know. Sarah thought about that question. About Jake and how terrified she'd been after the divorce, wondering if she could do this alone. About the teachers who'd helped her when she was struggling, who'd made sure Jake got breakfast at school on mornings when there wasn't enough food at home. About the kindness that had kept her afloat when she was drowning. Because somebody has to, Sarah said simply. Because he's a kid and he's hungry, and those two facts shouldn't be able to coexist in a world where people throw away more food in a day than he eats in a week. Because I have a son, and I would want someone to help him if I couldn't. Because it's the right thing to do, even when it costs you everything. Helena was quiet for a long time. Then, I want to hire you. Excuse me, not as Marcus's teacher. As his guardian. Co-guardian, technically. I want you to help me raise him. I'll provide everything financially. You'll want for nothing. Neither will your son. But Marcus needs someone he trusts, and that person isn't me. Not yet. Sarah felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. You want me to just uproot my entire life? Your life is already uprooted, Ms. Mitchell. You've lost your job. You're losing your apartment. Your ex-husband is filing for custody. You have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Helena's voice softened. And more importantly, Marcus needs you. He ran from my people. He won't run from you. I can't just take your money. Why not? You took my money when you gave Marcus food. You took my responsibility when you cared for him when I should have been there. The only difference is now I'm offering to compensate you fairly for doing what I was too broken to do myself. Sarah's head was spinning. This wasn't how life worked. You didn't just get rescued from disaster by billionaires who showed up at your door with blank checks and job offers. I need to think about this, Sarah managed. You have 24 hours. After that, I'm going through legal channels, and Marcus will end up in another foster home while courts sort out custody. Unless you help me. Helena stood, pulled out a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. Call me when you've decided. But Ms. Mitchell, I hope you say yes, because I've spent 5 years living with the guilt of abandoning my grandson. I won't make that mistake twice, and neither should you. After Helena left, Sarah called the one person who might understand, her younger sister Rachel. You're telling me a billionaire wants to hire you to co-parent her grandson? Rachel's voice was skeptical. Sarah, this sounds like a scam. I've verified everything. Helena Castellano is real. Marcus is real. This is all real. Okay, but think about this rationally. You don't know these people. What if she's crazy? What if there's some catch? The catch is I'd actually have money to feed my son. The catch is I wouldn't lose custody to David. The catch is I'd be helping a kid who needs help. The catch might also be that you're signing your life over to someone who's used to controlling everything around her. Rich people don't give away money without strings, Sarah. But Sarah was already thinking about Marcus, about those 2 old eyes, about the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world who saw him as human instead of problem to be managed. She called Helena the next morning. I'll do it. But I have conditions. Name them. I don't want charity. I want a job. A real job with a salary I earn, not money given out of guilt. There was a pause. Then, how do you feel about education reform? Within a week, Sarah's life had transformed so completely it felt like she'd stepped into someone else's existence. Helena established the Castellano Education Foundation and made Sarah the director of youth outreach. The salary was more than Sarah had made in her entire teaching career. The job was real, working with underprivileged kids, designing programs to keep them fed and educated and out of the same system that had chewed up Marcus and spit him out. Jake moved with her into the guest house on Helena's estate. Not the mansion itself. Sarah had insisted on maintaining some independence, but a separate building that was still 3 times the size of their old apartment. And Marcus came home. Not easily. Not without fear and suspicion and several failed attempts before he finally believed that this time, someone was staying. The first night Marcus slept at Helena's estate, he had a nightmare. Sarah heard him screaming from across the courtyard and ran. Helena was already there, standing helplessly in the doorway, while Marcus thrashed and sobbed. I don't know what to do, Helena whispered. I don't know how to help him. You learn, Sarah said, sitting on the edge of Marcus's bed, pulling him close until his breathing steadied. You learn because he needs you to. Helena watched, and Sarah saw something crack in that powerful woman's armor. Grief, maybe. Regret. Recognition that money couldn't buy back 5 years of Marcus's life that had been stolen by her mistake and other people's cruelty. The next morning, Helena sat down with Marcus at breakfast. I'm sorry, she said simply. I should have been there. I wasn't. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. Marcus looked at his grandmother for a long moment. Then quietly, okay. It was an instant healing. It wasn't a fairy tale where love conquered all and trauma disappeared. But it was a start. Over the next several months, something unexpected happened. Helena and Sarah became friends. Not employer and employee. Not benefactor and charity case. Friends. They worked together on the foundation, argued about strategies and priorities, discovered they had more in common than either expected. Both women who'd been abandoned by men who should have stood by them. Both women who'd learned to survive alone. Both women who'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone in their corner. The investigation into Marcus's disappearance led somewhere neither of them anticipated. The adoption agency that had pocketed Helena's donation turned out it was part of a larger operation. Falsifying records, taking money from well-meaning relatives, and then trafficking kids through the foster system. 47 children had been separated from family members who wanted them, all to line the pockets of people who saw vulnerable kids as profit centers. Helena unleashed her legal team like an army. Within 6 months, the agency was shut down, 17 people were arrested, and 47 children were returned to families who'd been told they were unwanted. Marcus's story became national news. Not because Helena wanted publicity, she tried to keep it quiet, but because someone leaked it. Billionaire's grandson lived on streets while she donated millions to charity. The headlines were brutal. The public reaction was vicious. Helena's company stock dropped. Board members demanded her resignation. Protesters showed up at her office calling her a hypocrite who cared more about her image than her own family. Helena endured it all with steel-spined grace. She didn't make excuses. She didn't deflect. She stood in front of cameras and said simply, I made a mistake that cost my grandson 5 years of his childhood. I'm spending the rest of my life trying to make that right. If you want to judge me, go ahead. I judge myself harshly enough, but it was what happened next that changed everything. Sarah came home one afternoon to find 5 car carriers parked outside Helena's estate. Each one held a Lamborghini. Different colors, all pristine, all worth more than Sarah would make in 5 years. What is this? Sarah asked Helena, who was standing in the driveway with an expression somewhere between amused and defiant. Those are for Principal Crawford's school. The one that fired you. Sarah stared. I don't understand. They're holding a fundraiser. A charity auction to benefit their scholarship program. Or so they claim. Most of that money will probably go to a new football stadium. But these 5 cars. Helena smiled coldly. I'm donating them with a stipulation that 100% of the proceeds go to a fund for low-income students. No new stadium. No administrative bonuses. Just scholarships for kids who need them. You bought 5 Lamborghinis just to spite Denise Crawford? I bought 5 Lamborghinis to make a point. That woman fired you for feeding a hungry child. She told you that poor kids weren't worth your time. So yes, I'm donating these cars, and yes, the press will be there, and yes, everyone will know that the school rejected a teacher who cared about underprivileged children, and now they're taking money earmarked specifically for those same children. Let her try to explain that moral calculus to her wealthy parents. Sarah couldn't help it. She laughed. It bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest, part hysteria and part genuine amusement at the absurdity of using 5 Lamborghinis as weapons in a war against educational inequity. You're insane, Sarah said. I'm rich. There's a difference. One gives you the luxury of being called eccentric instead of crazy. The auction raised $14 million. Every penny went to scholarships. Denise Crawford resigned 3 weeks later after a financial audit revealed she'd been skimming from school funds for years. 1 year after Sarah had shared her first sandwich with Marcus, she stood in the grand ballroom of the Castellano Education Foundation's new headquarters. The space was filled with families, kids who'd been reunited with relatives, parents who'd finally gotten custody back, social workers who'd helped make it happen. Marcus stood on a small stage next to Jake, the two of them now inseparable best friends. They were presenting an award to a social worker who'd helped reform the foster care system. Helena stood beside Sarah watching. The older woman had changed over the past year. She smiled more, laughed occasionally, looked less like a corporate titan and more like someone's grandmother, which was exactly what she'd become. I never thanked you properly, Helena said quietly. For what? For not giving up on him. For seeing value where everyone else saw a problem. For being brave enough to risk everything for a child who wasn't yours. Sarah thought about that, about how none of this had been bravery. It had just been basic human decency that somehow felt radical in a world that had forgotten how to care. He was never not mine, Sarah said simply. The moment I saw him hungry and alone, he became mine. That's just how it works when you have a heart. Marcus finished his speech and jumped off the stage, running straight to Sarah and Helena. He hugged them both fiercely. Did I do good? He asked. You did perfect, Helena assured him. That night, after the event had ended and most people had gone home, the four of them, Sarah, Helena, Marcus, and Jake, sat together in Helena's library. It was the most comfortable room in the mansion, filled with books and soft lighting and furniture that invited you to stay a while. Can I ask you something? Marcus said to Helena. Something I've been thinking about. Anything. Why didn't you want me? At first, when my parents died, the question hung in the air. Sarah saw Helena's composure crack, saw the grief and guilt that still haunted her even after all this time. Because I was a coward, Helena said simply. Your father was everything to me, and when he died, I thought I'd died too. I couldn't imagine raising you because every time I looked at you, I'd see him. I thought pushing you away would hurt less than having you close and being reminded every day of what I'd lost. And now I realize that pushing you away didn't hurt less. It hurt more. It hurt you, and it hurt me, and it was the worst decision I've ever made. You deserve better. You deserve the grandmother who was strong enough to love you even when it was painful. I'm sorry I wasn't that person when you needed me. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, Miss Sarah says that people make mistakes. She says what matters is whether you fix them. Miss Sarah is very wise. She also says that family isn't just blood. It's people who show up when things are hard. Sarah felt tears threatening. She looked at Jake, who was watching this exchange with a kind of emotional intelligence that made her proud and heartbroken simultaneously. So I was thinking, Marcus continued, that maybe we're all family now. You and Miss Sarah and me and Jake. Because we all showed up when things were hard. Helena pulled Marcus close, and Sarah saw tears streaming down the older woman's face. Not the careful, controlled emotion of a billionaire maintaining composure. Real tears. Ugly tears. The kind that came from finally letting yourself feel everything you've been holding back. Yes, Helena whispered. We're family. Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah and Helena sat on the terrace overlooking the gardens. Helena poured them both expensive wine that Sarah still wasn't quite comfortable drinking because her brain kept calculating how many groceries that bottle could buy. I never asked you, Helena said. That first day, when you shared your sandwich with Marcus. You knew you couldn't afford it. Your son needed food. Why did you do it? Sarah thought about that question, about all the moments in her life when she'd had to choose between self-preservation and doing what felt right, about how often those choices had cost her everything. Because that's what my mom did, Sarah said finally. We didn't have much growing up. But Mom always said that if you see someone who's suffering and you have the ability to help, even a little, you help. You don't calculate whether they deserve it. You don't worry about whether you can afford it. You just help because that's what humans are supposed to do for each other. Your mother sounds like she was an extraordinary woman. She was ordinary. That's what made it extraordinary. She wasn't rich or powerful or special. She just chose kindness when it would have been easier to look away. Helena raised her glass. To ordinary people making extraordinary choices. They drank, and Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the recognition that sometimes life surprised you. Sometimes you lost everything and discovered that what you built from the ashes was stronger than what had burned down. The foundation grew. In 2 years, they'd reunited 93 children with family members. They'd reformed adoption procedures in 4 states. They'd funded programs that kept kids fed and housed and safe when the system failed them. Marcus thrived. He joined Jake's soccer team. He started therapy to work through the trauma of those 5 years on the street. He struggled sometimes, had days where he couldn't believe this was real, where he tested boundaries and pushed back and made sure that this family wouldn't abandon him like everyone else had. And every time they stayed. Sarah stayed. Helena stayed. Jake stayed. They weathered the tantrums and the nightmares and the moments when Marcus pushed them away, because pushing them away was easier than risking attachment. On the 2nd anniversary of that first sandwich, Marcus asked Sarah a question. If I didn't have Grandma Helena, he said, if I was still just some homeless kid, would you still share your lunch with me? Sarah looked at this boy who'd become her son in every way that mattered except biology. This kid who'd been thrown away by a broken system and who'd somehow survived long enough to be found. I'd share my last piece of bread with you, she said. Always. Because you matter. You've always mattered. Money didn't make you worth caring about. You were worth it before Helena, before the foundation, before any of this. You were worth it the moment I saw you hungry and alone. Marcus hugged her then, fierce and tight. I love you, Miss Sarah. I love you too, kid. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about how strange life was. How one decision, one sandwich shared with a stranger, had led to all of this. A new family. A new purpose. A life that felt full in ways her old life never had, despite having so much less materially back then. Her phone buzzed. A text from Helena, board meeting tomorrow. They want to expand the foundation to 6 more states. Looks like we're going to be busy. Sarah smiled and typed back. Wouldn't want it any other way. Because that was the truth. This life, messy and complicated and full of other people's pain that she couldn't fix but could help carry. This life was worth living. This life mattered. Not because of the money or the success or the recognition, but because every day she got to look Marcus in the eye and tell him he was worth saving. Every day she got to help another child find their way home. That was the real gift. Not the Lamborghinis or the foundation or the comfortable house. The real gift was remembering that kindness wasn't transactional. That love wasn't something you earned through worthiness. That sometimes the smallest gesture, a shared sandwich, a moment of attention, the simple act of seeing someone's humanity could change everything. 3 years after that first sandwich, Sarah stood in another grand ballroom at another charity event. But this time she wasn't serving. She was being honored. The National Association of Social Workers was giving her an award for her work with the foundation. Marcus and Jake sat in the front row, both of them in suits that Helena had insisted on buying despite Sarah's protest that boys grew too fast to justify expensive clothing. Helena sat between them, her hand resting on Marcus's shoulder in a gesture that had become natural over time. Sarah's ex-husband David was conspicuously absent. He dropped the custody suit 18 months ago after realizing he'd rather have occasional visitation than deal with actual parenting responsibility. Jake seemed happier without the tension of forced visits with a father who'd never really wanted him in the first place. Sarah accepted the award, looked out at the crowd of social workers and activists and people who dedicated their lives to helping others. I'm not special, she said simply. I just saw a hungry kid and shared my lunch. That's not heroic. That's baseline human decency. The fact that we're treating basic kindness like it's revolutionary says more about our society than it does about me. The audience applauded anyway. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Sarah. She looked nervous, clutching a worn notebook to her chest. Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to say thank you. I was one of the kids your foundation helped reunite with my family. I've been in foster care for 3 years because of paperwork errors. Your team fixed it. I got to go home. Sarah felt tears threatening. What's your name? Jessica. Jessica Martinez. I'm in college now. Social work major. Because of you, not because of me. Because you decided to turn your pain into purpose. They talked for a few minutes, and then Jessica left to join her family. Sarah watched her go, feeling that familiar tightness in her chest that came from witnessing human resilience. She's going to change the world, Helena said, appearing at Sarah's elbow. Just like you did. I didn't change the world. I fed a kid. You fed a kid when everyone else walked by. That changed his world. And his world changing changed mine. And now we're changing others' worlds. That's how it works, Sarah. One sandwich at a time. They drove home together that night. The 4 of them piled into Helena's car despite having a driver available. Marcus and Jake had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the excitement of the evening. Do you ever regret it? Helena asked quietly. Giving up teaching? Your old life. Sarah thought about that. About her tiny apartment and the constant stress of unpaid bills. About the isolation of those years when she'd been too busy surviving to actually live. About the job that had paid poverty wages and then fired her for doing the right thing. No, she said honestly. That life was safe, predictable, and slowly suffocating me. This life is messy and complicated and sometimes overwhelming. But it's real. It matters. I matter not just as someone who keeps other people alive, but as someone who helps them actually live. They pulled into the estate. Home. When had she started thinking of it that way? When had Helena's mansion stopped feeling like a temporary shelter and started feeling like where she belonged? They carried the sleeping boys inside, tucked them into beds in rooms that were theirs now, decorated with posters and trophies and all the accumulated evidence of childhoods lived fully. Sarah kissed Jake's forehead, pulled his blanket up, whispered that she loved him. In the next room, Helena was doing the same with Marcus. The 2 women met in the hallway between the boys' rooms. Thank you, Sarah said, for everything. For believing me. For letting me be part of this. Thank you for refusing to look away. For being brave when bravery was expensive. For teaching an old woman that it's never too late to be the person you should have been. They stood there for a moment, 2 women who'd come from different worlds and who'd build a bridge between them out of shared purpose and genuine affection. Same time tomorrow? Helena asked. Foundation has that meeting with the governor about statewide reform. Wouldn't miss it. Sarah walked back to the guest house, her home, her space in this new life. She poured herself tea, sat in the small porch, looked up at stars that were visible here in ways they never had been in the city. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Saw you on the news. My sister, the award winner. Mom would be proud. Sarah smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Yeah, Mom will be proud. Not because of the award or the recognition or the money, but because her daughter had seen someone suffering and hadn't looked away. That was the real measure of a life well lived. Not what you accumulated, but what you gave. Not what you achieved, but who you helped. Not whether you were comfortable, but whether you made the uncomfortable choice when it mattered. She thought about Marcus, asleep in his bed, safe and loved and finally home. She thought about all the other kids the foundation had helped, the families reunited, the lives rebuilt. One sandwich. That's all it had taken to start this chain reaction of healing. One sandwich shared with a hungry child when she could barely afford to feed her own. Sometimes the universe paid you back for kindness. Not always in ways you expected. Not always fairly or proportionally. But sometimes, if you were very lucky, the universe sent 5 Lamborghinis and a billionaire grandmother and a new family built from broken pieces. And sometimes the reward for doing the right thing wasn't just survival. It was finally getting to live. If this story moved you, if you believe kindness still matters in a world that often feels cold and cruel, Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more true stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Because the world needs more people willing to share their lunch with someone who's hungry. The world needs more people like Sarah. The world needs more people like you.